Okay, Reddit, buckle up, because I just had a pre-vacation experience that was so insane, I honestly thought I was hallucinating from pre-flight anxiety. I'm Darla, and I'm the chief of police in a mid-sized city, a job that, let me tell you, is stressful enough to age you about 10 years a day. So, needless to say, I was beyond ready for this vacation. I had been planning to head to Turks and Caicos for months. Sun, sand, fruity drinks with tiny umbrellas, the whole shebang. Complete disconnect from the constant barrage of 911 calls, budget meetings, and public scrutiny, just pure bliss. I finally got through security, despite the usual long lines and the feeling that I was about to be strip-searched at any moment, and made my way to my gate. I was flying first class because, damn it, I deserved it. I found my seat, stowed my carry-on, and settled in with a magazine, already picturing myself lounging on the beach. The flight attendants were bustling about, getting everyone settled, the usual pre-flight hustle and bustle. I closed my eyes for a moment, just breathing deeply and trying to feel the tension bleed out of my shoulders. This was it. Freedom. Relaxation. Then, bam. My idyllic bubble burst. I heard a voice, shrill and accusatory, cutting through the general noise like a rusty saw. Excuse me. Excuse me, I need to speak to someone about this. My eyes snapped open, and I saw her. The quintessential, Karen, standing a few rows back, but pointing directly, at me. I mean, come on. Big blonde hair teased into some kind of helmet-like structure, a bright blue pantsuit that screamed, "I demand to speak to your manager," and a face contorted in righteous indignation. She was a walking, talking stereotype. I kind of ignored her at first, figuring maybe she was having a bad day. But then she started stomping her way down the aisle, her voice growing louder with each step. I said, "I need to speak to someone. This is completely unacceptable." She finally reached my row, planted herself squarely in front of my seat, and glared down at me. "You," she said, her voice dripping with, well, I'm pretty sure it was disdain mixed with a generous helping of pure, unadulterated entitlement. "You don't belong here." I actually chuckled before I could stop myself. "Excuse me?" I asked, trying to keep my tone even. I already knew, deep down, what was coming, but I wanted to give her a chance to maybe, possibly, not be a complete monster. Boy, was I wrong. "You heard me," Karen said, her face turning an unfortunate shade of puce. "You don't belong in first class. You probably don't even belong on this flight. I bet you don't even have a real ticket." Okay, so she was going there. Really? I took a deep breath, trying to remember all those mindfulness exercises I'd half-heartedly attempted to incorporate into my routine. This was not how I envisioned starting my vacation. "I assure you, ma'am," I said, keeping my voice calm and professional, a tone I'd perfected over years of dealing with angry citizens, "I have a valid ticket, and I most certainly belong here. I paid for this seat just like everyone else." I even gestured to my boarding pass sitting on the tray table. She completely ignored it. "Oh, I'm sure you think you do," she sneered, "but I highly doubt it. You probably snuck on here somehow. I've seen it happen before. People like you always trying to take advantage." She let the sentence hang, unfinished, but the implication was thick enough to spread on toast. The "people like you" part just hung in the air like a bad smell. My blood was starting to boil. I'm a police chief. I deal with criminals, emergencies, and life-or-death situations daily. I was trying really hard to not let this woman ruin my hard-earned vacation. The audacity of this woman, the blatant racism, was staggering. Passengers nearby started to take notice. Murmurs rippled through the cabin, and a flight attendant was making a beeline towards us, her face etched with concern. I knew I had to shut this down, and fast. I could feel my professional demeanor slipping, replaced by the simmering rage that had seen me through countless tough situations on the streets. "Ma'am," I said, my voice now carrying a distinct edge, I'm going to ask you to stop harassing me. I have done absolutely nothing wrong. She huffed and put her hand on her hips. Oh, I'm harassing you? I'm just trying to keep this flight safe and comfortable for everyone else. I am pretty sure this plane is going to crash and I will not be safe. I felt like I was taking crazy pills. This lady was out of her mind. I wanted to get this over with as soon as possible so I could proceed with my vacation. I reached into my purse, deliberately slow and deliberate. Everyone was watching now. The flight attendant was hovering anxiously nearby. Karen was still standing there, arms crossed, a smug look on her face. I pulled out my wallet, flipped it open, and held it up. "This is my identification," I said, my voice clear and ringing with authority. "I am Chief Darla Peterson, of the, my city name, police department." The smug look on Karen's face crumbled. Her eyes widened, and her mouth dropped open. The color drained from her face, leaving her looking like a startled ghost. The effect was immediate and dramatic. Karen literally froze. Her mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water, but no sound came out. The smugness vanished, replaced by a mixture of shock and fear. It was actually kind of satisfying to watch her crumble. The nearby passengers, who had been whispering and craning their necks to see what was happening, gasped audibly. The flight attendant stopped dead in her tracks, her eyes wide with disbelief. I held my badge out a little longer, letting the reality of the situation sink in. I was the chief of police. I was not some random person she could bully and intimidate. The silence stretched, thick and heavy, broken only by the hum of the plane's engines. Finally, Karen found her voice, but it was a shaky, breathless whisper. "Police. Chief." She stammered, her eyes still glued to my badge. But, she seemed utterly unable to process the information. It was like her brain had short-circuited. The power dynamic had shifted completely, and she was clearly struggling to adjust. I lowered my badge, but the effect had been achieved. The air of authority that I usually reserved for crime scenes and press conferences was now focused solely on her. "Yes, ma'am," I said, my voice calm but firm. "Chief Darla Peterson. And I suggest you apologize for your behavior and return to your seat." I folded my arms, waiting for her response. For a moment, I thought she actually might apologize. Her face was a mask of embarrassment and confusion. But then, something snapped. Maybe it was the humiliation, maybe it was the realization that she had just made a monumental mistake, or maybe it was just the inherent ugliness that had been lurking beneath the surface all along. Her face twisted again, and the color returned, but this time it was a furious red. You, it's because you people are taking over everything," she screeched, her voice rising in volume again. "You, insert a vile racial slur here, don't deserve anything. You stole your position. You probably slept your way to the top." The air in the cabin turned ice cold. Gasps rippled through the passengers, this time laced with outrage. The flight attendant looked like she was about to faint. I felt a surge of anger so intense it almost took my breath away. I couldn't believe she had just said that. In public. On an airplane. To a police chief. Okay, that was it. The gloves were off. My carefully cultivated professional demeanor shattered like glass. This woman was not only a racist, entitled bully, but she was also now committing multiple crimes, including hate speech and disorderly conduct. "You are under arrest," I said, my voice now cold and devoid of any emotion. I reached into my purse again, this time pulling out my handcuffs. I could feel the eyes of every single person on that plane boring into me. The flight attendant, who had finally regained some composure, backed away slowly, clearly not wanting to be anywhere near this unfolding disaster. Karen stared at me, her eyes wide with disbelief. "You can't arrest me," she shrieked. "I haven't done anything wrong. You're just being another racial slur." I ignored her protests and efficiently cuffed her hands behind her back. Years of police training kicked in, and I moved with a speed and precision that surprised even me. "Ma'am, you have the right to remain silent." I began, reciting the Miranda rights automatically. A few male passengers helped escort her off the plane. A couple of the passengers gave me a thumbs up. I thought it was over, but she wouldn't shut up and kept screaming racial slurs. I then proceeded to charge her with hate crimes. I signaled to the flight attendant, who was very apologetic, and told her that I was going to deplane with the suspect and I wasn't sure if I would make it back in time for the flight. As I led her off the plane, I could feel the stares of the other passengers burning into my back. Some were shaking their heads in disgust, others were applauding softly. I passed her off to the airport police. They took her away, still screaming and cursing, and I stood there for a moment, just trying to process what had just happened. My vacation was already off to a horrible start. I notified my second-in-command that I was going to be delayed, but I would still be able to make it to my vacation. After the airport police took custody of Karen, I had to deal with the paperwork for a bit. As much as I wanted to just forget the whole thing and head to the beach, I couldn't just leave it hanging. There were statements to be taken, reports to be filed, and arrangements to be made for Karen's arraignment. Luckily, the airport police were incredibly efficient and helpful. They recognized who I was, and they knew how important it was to handle the situation swiftly and professionally. After about an hour of filling out forms and answering questions, I was finally free to go. The entire time I couldn't stop thinking about the beach. I was so looking forward to this trip. My mind kept replaying the incident on the plane. I was angry. I was exhausted. I was deeply disappointed that someone could act like that in this day and age. But I was also relieved that I had been able to handle the situation effectively and that justice would be served. When I got back to the gate, I was informed that my flight had already departed. Talk about adding insult to injury. I was frustrated, but I understood. The airline rebooked me on the next flight to Turks and Caicos, which was leaving the following morning. It meant an extra night in a generic airport hotel instead of a luxurious resort, but I tried to stay positive. At least I was still going. I called my second-in-command, Lieutenant Gomez, and gave him a brief update. He was aghast at what had happened. He assured me that everything was under control at the precinct and that I should just focus on relaxing and enjoying my vacation. That night in the hotel, I tossed and turned, unable to sleep. I kept replaying the scene on the plane in my head. I felt like I was taking crazy pills. This lady was out of her mind. I couldn't shake the image of Karen's face, contorted with hate and rage. I knew that racism was still a problem in society, but to experience it so directly, so blatantly, was still shocking. I knew that not everyone was like Karen, but the encounter left a bitter taste in my mouth. The next morning, I finally boarded my flight to Turks and Caicos. It was a smaller plane, and I was in a less luxurious seat, but I didn't care. I was finally on my way. As the plane took off, I closed my eyes and took a deep breath. I tried to let go of all the anger and frustration I had been holding on to. I reminded myself that I was strong, capable, and respected, and that one person's ignorance couldn't take that away from me.